Welcome to the ATP Project. You're with your host, Matt, with no adult supervision at all today. And I'm having a wicked podcast with Bill Campbell, one of my good mates. Well, I'm claiming you as one of my good mates because I absolutely love everything you do. And I know for a fact that you are the man that's going to help me help a lot of people. Because for anyone that doesn't know Bill, then I don't know where you've been or you're not part of our industry, but Bill is one of the leaders in the science behind changing physiques. He's heavily involved in the ISSN. He's got the wickedest facilities and labs where he's capable of measuring calorie burn and metabolic rates, and he's published mountains of papers talking about manipulation of calories and eating strategies in order to maintain healthy lean muscle mass, but also for fat burning and building muscle. But Bill, do you want to tell us all about you for those that weird people that don't know who you are and don't do your quizzes on Instagram?
Sure, yeah. So I make quizzes on Instagram. That's one thing I do. I'm a professor at the University of South Florida, where I direct the Performance and Physique Enhancement Laboratory. And as you said, I do research on sports nutrition products. We look at physique enhancement. So we look at how to lose fat, how to gain muscle, how to counteract the negative adaptations that occur with dieting. And essentially, I like to describe my research as helping people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. And as I talk about my research, which is what we're going to do today, my goal is to make it simple. A lot of professors and researchers, they make things more complicated, and it doesn't have to be like that. So if your audience is looking for big words and cellular mechanisms, this isn't the podcast. But if they're looking through our conversation to take something they can do tomorrow, this is it. Let's do it. Exactly.
I love what we actually teach people around ATP to have in the back of their mind, so what? Every time we're talking, they need to be going, so what? So what are you telling me this for? Or so what do I do tomorrow? So today's going to have lots of so what moments. So everyone will know so exactly what they can do tomorrow to make some changes, or they can understand where they might have been going wrong and where their handbrakes may be with their own metabolism. So where I wanted to start today is I want to talk about the adaptation game. And I call it the adaptation game because anytime we want to build muscle or lose fat, that's some sort of an adaptation to some sort of stress. But sooner or later, we adapt to that adaptation. And now this is where I want to talk to you about how long, or how do we know when we've adapted? How do we know when our adaptation is good? How do we know when our adaptation is bad? And how do we know what sort of changes to make? And if there is any magic recipe, I'll get you to tell us that, if there's one magic path that works. But otherwise, let's just discuss all the variables. So for starters, how does someone understand what their calorie burn should be? How do we understand, how does someone accurately measure their metabolic rate?
So let me answer that one step back, and we can get to metabolic rate. But if somebody wants to know what their metabolism is, I think the most practical way to approach that is to monitor your food intake. We can measure it, and I'm going to go into detail on how we measure it. But if you know how many calories you're eating every day, and you don't gain weight or lose weight, that's the key number that you want. That's really all that matters. Who cares what the machine says? And I love the machine. I use the machine every day. I'm on it myself every other week. So I love the machine. But that doesn't give me as much practical information as just my calorie level. Yep. So if we're talking about the goal of trying to build muscle or lose fat, I think the most important test you can perform on yourself is to take some time and just monitor your food intake and your body weight and see the caloric intake level where you don't gain weight and where you don't lose weight.
Okay.
And I call that your caloric maintenance. So just a real quick discussion on that. You should do that for 2 weeks. Pick a calorie intake for a 2-week period, 14 days, where you think, hey, I probably won't lose weight here and I won't gain weight here. Don't start an exercise program. Don't do anything new. Or if you had been exercising, keep doing the same thing. Weigh yourself every day for 14 days. And at the end of the first 7 days, what's the average? At the end of the second 7 days, what's your average? If those two are pretty close, there you go.
And you said average there too. So you're not looking at just the scales every day and determining whether that's a significant shift. So you're saying take an average over the 7 days?
Yes. The problem with looking at that scale weight on 1 day at a time, one day it's up 2 pounds, the other day it's down 3 pounds, and you start doubting your approach, and that just creates a lot of anxiety for people. So take a 7-day average. And now, again, if you were gaining a pound every day for 7 days, okay, you're obviously eating too much for your caloric maintenance, or if you're losing weight. So I wouldn't say that I don't look at it. I totally look at a week average, and I base my opinion on that. Because if you look at it day to day, you're going to change your plan day to day, and that's not helpful. You're kind of just aimlessly wondering what the scale said today.
Yeah.
Maybe the scale rounds up every fifth a half pound, and it happened to round up or down that day. Maybe you retained a little more water. So you're basing decisions daily, which I don't think need to be made.
Okay.
Now, let's talk about what you asked about. How do you measure that? Well, we can measure your caloric expenditure. And practically, that's called a metabolic rate test. And there's two ways to do that. The most valid way is called direct calorimetry. And calorimetry means the measurement of heat. So they put you in a small room and it measures your body heat. That's not very common. Very few labs have that. What almost all exercise science labs have, like mine, is called indirect calorimetry. That's where we will put a bubble over your head, and this bubble will monitor the gases that you're breathing, the oxygen, carbon dioxide. You can also just use a face mask to get the same data. And the reason that this works is there's a direct correlation between the amount of oxygen that you breathe in and use and the heat that's produced. So I'll give a value. For every 1 liter of oxygen you consume, it means you're burning about 5 calories of energy.
Okay.
So it gives us a great estimation of your resting caloric expenditure.
Yeah, wow.
Now, that's usually going to be lower than what you burn per day because you don't sit around for 24 hours. Normally, you get up to go to the bathroom, you eat lunch, you might go to work, you might take the dog for a walk, maybe you lift weights. So you have to take what the value that the machine gives you, your resting metabolic rate, then you multiply that by an activity factor. And for somebody let's just say you're a literal couch potato, like you literally do nothing, you would multiply it by like 1.1, 1.2. So not much above that. For myself, it's about 1.5. I do a little bit of cardio. I lift weights 4 days per week. I try to get out of my chair every hour. So I'm moderately active. And if you're really active, maybe 1.8.
Yep.
So that's another way to get to where you're trying to estimate the total amount of calories that you need to keep you alive. And that's what that resting metabolic rate measure is. It tells you if you did nothing but lay down for 24 hours, how many calories do you need to sustain your life?
Have you ever measured the calorie burn during those activities as well to see if there's much variability from one person to another? I always look at the fact that if someone like Steve-O, he runs 20 Ks every day, and he kind of does stupid things like that all the time. If I was to try to do that, I reckon my calorie burn, because I'm not a real good runner, when people first start a campaign, do they burn a lot more calories when they're bad at an activity?
Yeah, think of swimming's like the best example. When you start swimming, you're like flailing around. You swim 20 meters, you burn a ton of calories. Versus if you're really good, you don't burn hardly any because you're so efficient. Yeah,
and I can imagine one of the adaptations of swimming might be insulation and buoyancy, which fat preservation might be a good adaptation for swimming. We did that. That's just my theory because I was a swimmer. But so. In that instance, okay, so let's just discuss that. So I've measured my maintenance calories and I know how much I eat, and I just stay where I am. If my goal, is it possible then for me to create a strategy for adaptation, because ultimately I want to lose fat and build muscle? What do I do with my calories if I want to do both, and is it possible to do both? Can I create a plan where I'm going to be burning off maximum amount of fat and building maximum amount of muscle at the same time?
Yeah, so it's possible. We actually published a paper on that this past year. Chris Barakat invited me to help with this. So he was the project leader, and he did a great job. And we cited like study after study after study where we showed you can gain muscle and lose fat. I have a problem with that, though. I would say don't try to do that. Pick your goal and pursue that goal.
Yeah.
But since you asked, how can you do that? Well, the way that can be done is probably trying to stay in your caloric maintenance area. You eat high protein and you resistance train quite often. Mm-hmm. If you do those things, you have a better chance to increase your muscle and to lose some fat.
All right. And
that can happen whether or not you're training or untrained.
So that's more maintaining those calories, the adequate calories, and then manipulating your training and maybe even manipulating protein ratio or macro ratios to change what you might be burning and what you might be building. But it's sitting around those maintenance calories. You're not aiming for a surplus or a deficit.
Correct. Now, I would say if you do increase those calories, as long as they're all from the protein, that again gives you a better chance. Now, can you diet and gain muscle? Yes, but you're not as likely to do that than if you were at maintenance calories.
Yeah.
If as you start to increase your calories, can you gain muscle and lose fat? It's possible. It's been done, but it's not as likely. So I think the best scenario, stay in that maintenance area, increase your protein, probably decrease your carbs and fats a little, and make sure you're hitting the weights hard.
Yeah. So okay, the most likely goal from our listeners that we've heard is that fat loss. Okay, so if I've worked out my maintenance calories, so where do I go from there to induce an adaptation that is fat loss? Do I cut my calories, and by how much? Yeah,
so the best thing to do would be just don't eat anything for 5 days. No, I'm joking. Don't do that. It works. Yeah. So my approach, my lab's approach is how much fat can we take off of the human body, but we got to maintain muscle mass and we want to maintain metabolism. We do not want those to go down.
Yep.
So I've found what I think is a really good sweet spot for most people where they can lose fat at a pretty good rate and maintain most of their muscle. And I've talked about this in terms of the 3 principles of fat loss. And let me just share them real quick. The 3 principles are: don't crash diet or don't try to lose weight quickly. That's rule number 1. Take a long game approach. Take your time, chill out, relax. The second thing is don't decrease protein when dieting. And then the third thing is make sure you're resistance training.
Yep.
So how much do we reduce? I think the best sweet spot for most people is a 25% caloric reduction. You start to go above that, muscle mass starts to come off. If you go below that, fat loss tends to be especially slow. Mm-hmm. So, and you got to be careful of looking at the scale weight here because you might be gaining muscle and it won't show up on the scale because you've also lost fat. So you got to be, you want to be careful. And I also say 25% reduction, monitor your body composition about every 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. And if you are going to use the scale, about 1% of your current body weight per week would be the most amount of weight that you want to lose.
Yeah, 1%?
Those are all of the numbers.
Yeah, okay. So you said 1% per week is what you could expect?
At the maximum. If you're losing more than that, you're probably losing muscle mass. So that's the top range. Even less than that's fine. So let me give an example for myself. And people struggle with this. If I weigh 200 pounds and I lose 1% per week, that's 2 pounds. Well, if I do that for 52 weeks, I'm dead in a year. Like I literally would not be alive.
Yeah.
So people think, 1%, that's slow. No, it's not. It's only slow when you look at it for a week at a time. But you don't do that. Spread out.
Yeah, right. So for those people that are at home and they're just using the scales and that sort of stuff to monitor, do you ever do tape measurements as well to say, is there any ways that people can combine weight with body shape changes to determine if it's muscle or fat that they're losing?
Yeah, it's a great idea to use like a Skinfold Caliper or tape measure of the waist. And I'm a scientist, so I like getting more data. Yeah. But I also appreciate it can be a little obsessive. You're tracking your macros, you're weighing yourself, you're getting the tape measure out. So I think a scale is a great thing. Probably a necessity for most people. I also like the Skinfold Caliper. I'm gonna if you can just pinch your belly. Yep. You can do it yourself. You don't even need anybody else. And you can that's a very good marker of, am I losing fat or gaining fat? Yeah.
That's cool. So then people can have an idea. So how long? So you say we work out our calories, we drop it by about 25%. How long do you, in your opinion, can people do that before they start to adapt to that adaptation in regards to, I mean, one of your favorite bits of information you shared was some case studies of people coming into comp, physique competitors coming into comp, and you showed within a few weeks thyroid hormones and that sort of stuff would change. So when someone does a 25% calorie reduction and they're starting to see the changes on the scales, sooner or later they start to adapt to that by starting to preserve, because like you said, if you maintain that for a year, 50% of your body would be gone, so at what point do people to adapt, in your opinion, and what are the signs that they could see that would alert them to the fact that that's no longer working for them and they might need to change?
Yeah, so let me give the numbers, and I'll just give you something that I did, like a personal experiment on myself. I think it was about 2 years ago. The worst thing that somebody can do if they to make these adaptations stop quick, or to kind of dominate, is to crash diet. If you cut your calories by 40%, and that's what my lab just did, you're asking the body to adapt to that very quickly. And when I say adapt, essentially you keep dieting, but you don't keep losing fat. And what we believe happens is your metabolic rate has slowed down. So what used to be a caloric deficit is now your maintenance. Yeah. And that's a bad place to be, because, well, if you're like me, and I'll assume you, I love to eat. Like, I love food.
I love food. So, yep.
If I can, the more food I can eat, the happier I am. So the worst thing you can do is to be in a hurry with dieting. Yeah. What my lab has been studying, and what I've been doing in my own life, is if I'm going to go on a diet, I don't diet very long before I take a break. So I usually increase my calories on the weekends. We call that a refeed. After every five weeks of that, I might take a week off. Now, when we do these things, it's not like a food orgy where I'm eating everything in sight. I'm careful. I'm going back to what I think my maintenance calories are. So it's still controlled, but I'm no longer dieting. So those are things you can do to help you avoid these plateaus and avoid these adaptations.
So let's say,
now, do you want to talk about?
Sorry, but what I wanted to say is that if we've had the adaptation and you've found that you've crash dieted and that sort of stuff, your metabolic rate and your calorie burn has dropped down to match your calorie intake, where do you go from there? So if that's a person, like some people might think, oh, I got to train harder and eat less to get that calorie deficit again for this lower metabolic rate. Or is at that point, you just alluded to you just suggested that at that point you would do a refeed, or you would increase your calorie again in order to stimulate that metabolism to fire up again. So we do the 25% drop for a period of time until we see some adaptation. Where do we go then? We go calories up or calories down?
So I think it's somewhat dependent on your goal. So if you are a bodybuilder and you're stepping on stage in 7 weeks, you might not have the luxury of taking a break. You might just have to do what you said. Exercise more, diet harder. But that's a very unique population. And depending on how long they have till their show, they might not have to do that. What I would suggest is, for most people who aren't bodybuilding competitors, who don't have, who have a choice, hopefully we've done our job of educating them. This is we're not in a hurry here. We're trying to set you up with lifelong habits so you don't have to diet as often as what you've done in the past. But as you're dieting, let's say we take a 25% and you're no longer losing weight. And I define that as a 2-week period where you're just not losing any more weight or fat. So you're not losing fat because we're monitoring that.
Yep.
That's probably a good time to say, hey, let's take a break.
Yep.
For a week or two, increase our calories, and then we can go back to dieting. And we just finished a study on this in my lab last spring, where hopefully we'll publish that this year. The amount of weight, this is where in females, so that these females were lean to start, they dieted 2 weeks, then they took a week off, they dieted 2 more weeks, they took another week break, then they dieted again for 2 weeks. The amount of weight that they gained during their diet break was like half or a quarter of a kg. So this fear that people have, oh, I'm going to undo all of my damage. We did not see that in our study. Yes, on average, they gained a little bit of weight. But at the end of the 6 weeks, there was no difference in overall fat loss or muscle retention than the group who never took a break.
Oh, wow.
So you can be confident in the research that we provide that we conducted. You will not be doing catastrophic damage to your goals.
But that break's not a food orgy, and the break's not just what we might call a cheat meal that goes for a weekend or a cheat week. You're going just back to maintenance calories and maintaining the same macro split. Are they still looking at maintaining the same ratios of protein, carb, and fat, or are you allowing them to make up that extra calories specifically through protein or specifically through carbs?
Yeah, so what we did was we kept protein the same the whole 6 weeks, even through the diet breaks. And during their diet breaks, they increased the carbs and fats based on their preference.
Wow, okay, that's excellent. Because I've seen so it's kind of, I mean, you've done the papers showing as well that if we increase the calories from protein, that works as well. So you've got the other data saying that we just jack up the protein every once in a while and doesn't have any detrimental effects, and in fact may support further muscle gain. But then you're also saying that we can keep the protein adequate the whole way through, and then we can do our refeeds with carbs or fat, or carbs and fat. That's excellent. So a lot of that calories in, to a certain degree, is going to be determining this calories out. And is that all done predominantly through hormonal manipulation, like the thyroid gland and that sort of stuff? The thyroid hormones is a big part of this, isn't it?
Yeah. So my current thinking on this is I don't know if I don't have data that convinces me that it's carbs or fat that's causing thyroid to rebound or leptin to go back up. It's almost like the fact that you're eliminating the caloric deficit is what's causing the hormones to come back. And I would default to you. What do you think? I think it's just this energy imbalance that's being corrected that brings the hormones back.
Well, ultimately, in a holistic system, it's probably a little bit of everything. So you'll find that all of these things, the leptins, the ghrelins, the insulins, the cortisols, the thyroids, they're all working together to maintain homeostasis. So you'll find the reason why I was asking about thyroid was because a common practice for the physique competitors, once they get that calorie deficit that's led to adaptation, is that's when they can start to manipulate other hormones as well to get that metabolic rate back up. At that point, you'll see a lot of people supplementing with such things as T3 or something just to get that metabolism cranking, because that was the most obvious decline in regards to hormones and that sort of stuff. And if you fixed up that bit, we could actually compensate for that deficit metabolism. So the thyroid, they're all linked though. That's this big holistic flock of birds that we are, where everything kind of happens at once.
I get excited about that kind of data.
Yeah. And, oh man, there's so much really cool data around it, because you also look at the fact that one of the quick changes with a thyroid is with a reverse T3, the ability for it to quickly shuttle the T4 that's already been released from the thyroid down a reverse T3 pathway and away from T3. The T3 itself is about 7 to 8 times more potent at stimulating thermogenesis than T4. But if it goes from T4 to reverse T3, then that's 1/100th of the effect of T4. So that's a quick shift between reverse T3 and T3 pathways can be, when you look at it, 700 to 800 times the ability to regulate metabolism. That's a very quick way that the body can shut down metabolism if it thinks that its thyroid's running too fast and then the calories just aren't matching. So those sort of things, there's a lot of different ways that people can assess to see if they've hit a plateau, if their adaptation is a good adaptation or a bad adaptation, that we can use everything from pathology testing to symptom pictures and these other little tests that people can do at home. So what happens there is we get our calorie deficit, we're burning our fat, we're hitting our plateaus. We then might experiment with jacking up the protein or experiment with jacking up the carbs and fats. Do you encourage people to kind of just follow their intuition a little bit, and if they're craving anything in particular, then to actually use that to increase their calories for those little breaks? Or do you do you really structure it for your clients? Tell them exactly what to do.
I'm highly structured on protein. So the philosophy that I've named is a protein anchored philosophy. Yep. So we kind of say, if you can, try to eat your weight in pounds by grams of protein, or in your country, 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass.
Yep.
That keeps you full. That supports metabolic rate. It supports retention of muscle during a diet. So at a minimum, don't reduce protein when dieting. Mm-hmm. So we start there.
Yeah.
So I don't care what people do with carbs and fat. I like them to, like, as an example, my wife loves carbs. She doesn't eat bacon when I make it. I like more fatty foods. She doesn't eat bacon.
She watches you make it, smells it and everything, and doesn't eat it. Oh.
Occasionally, but if there's like birthday cake on the table, she's there.
Wow.
She'll devour that. So again, back to my philosophy, helping people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. I don't want to be putting up a lot of hurdles. Well, you have to eat more fat or you have to eat more carbs. As much as possible, let's work with your natural cravings, your natural tendencies. Now, that's not to say that increasing off from carbs or increasing off from fat may be better. I just don't have data to suggest it is, so I'm not going to tell people to do one or the other.
Yeah.
But I do have the opinion that I don't want you lowering protein, and I have data to support that. So I'm strict on protein. The other stuff, what are the foods you like? Fill up the calories with them.
Excellent.
Makes you happy.
Oh, that's good. That is really good to know that there's, because if people need to have that certain amount of ownership of their own protocols. So too, I think it's important that you do give those ability for them to manipulate it that way and put in the foods that they like. And
now, if somebody doesn't know, then I say, well, just split them evenly. Let's start there, and you'll pretty quickly realize, oh, I realize I like carbs more. So that's actually how we structure our research. We give people just some guidelines.
Yep.
But I don't care as long as they don't go over their calories, because, after all, it's a weight loss study.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the adaptation the other way, the muscle gain. So same thing. So we've worked out our maintenance calories. What percentage increase to calories would you recommend for people that want to gain some muscle?
So the first question I would ask that person is, how comfortable are you gaining some fat on this journey to more muscle? So that's the first question.
Yeah.
If they're like, well, I don't want to gain much fat, then I would probably not go above a 10% increase in calories.
Okay.
I would tend to, let's say they're already eating 2.2 grams per kg of protein. I think it probably makes more sense to increase some calories from carbs to give you just more glycogen to fuel your workouts, because I want you exercising more frequently and as intensely as you can recover from with this 10% increase in calories.
Yeah.
If somebody says, I don't care if I gain fat, all right, well, let's start at 15% or a 20% increase over your maintenance calories.
Yeah.
Because I work with a lot of females, or I communicate with a lot of females, they're not usually trying to bulk. That's usually a male dominated sector of my communication.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because it's hard to, because you do talk to a lot of people that go through a bulking phase or preparing for their before photo. It's an interesting thing, because I mean, you can't turn that fat into muscle, can you? Like, a lot of these people thinking, I'm bulking up, I'm just going to get bigger, and then all of a sudden you get these opinions that they think they can bulk up and then convert that fat to muscle. You can't convert fat to muscle. So
no, they're two different tissues. And I'll say this: when you're young, like when I was in my 20s, all right, I'm going to get fat and I'll lose it. Yeah. Now I'm in my 40s. I don't want to go. I don't want to have to lose it.
No.
I'm more cautious on the way up. I love how you said preparing for your before photos. That's what people are doing.
Yeah, well, I think I've spent a long time preparing for my before photo. Very good. Hopefully the after photo doesn't take as long to achieve after that. But because I find that's an interesting thing, you know, like you see these people that do these bulking phases and then they just really struggle, because if you bulk up and if the fat builds faster than the muscle or so, doesn't that totally screw your metabolism in itself? I mean, having that, generating a certain degree of obesity, it creates a whole different biochemical trap. All of a sudden you then got all these extra adipokine chemicals getting released from fat cells that are contributing to hormonal changes and inflammation and insulin resistance issues or whatever. There's so many complications that can come from going through a bulking campaign, especially when you mention that it's possible to burn some fat and build some muscle at a calorie maintenance phase just by manipulating macros and exercise. So for those guys that want to bulk right up without any sort of chemical advantage or anything like that, so for the non-enhanced athletes that are then trying to bulk up off season, is that something that you recommend at all? So you go 10% calories, but anything more than that, and it's going to get a little bit out of control, huh?
Yeah, well, I almost look at bodybuilders or the physique athlete as a completely different species. In that case, I think they can be more aggressive in every aspect of what they're doing. So yep. I definitely separate them from somebody who's just trying to live a lifestyle of, hey, I don't want to get too fat, or I want to try to maintain my muscle. Whereas bodybuilders, they have to look good one day out of the year, how many ever days they're going to compete. I wouldn't discourage them from being more aggressive on a bulk phase, 20-25%, gain as much muscle, and then because out of anybody on the planet, they're the ones that are disciplined enough to lose it for that day of competition. So I separate. I'm very careful to separate the populations that I'm giving advice to. And
how do people know? I mean, the bodybuilders might have, calipers and coaches and that sort of stuff. But so obviously we're going to increase our calories to get some calorie surplus to build up some extra muscle. So the scales typically should be coming up. How do we know that it's coming up as muscle, and how do we know if it's coming up as fat? Or how do they know that they're building the right stuff? Because everything's going to be getting bigger.
Yeah, well, the reality is if you're just looking at scale weight, you don't know. I mean, you can kind of look in the mirror and maybe have an idea, but that's where I think it's very important. Get a monthly body composition assessment. So, and that does not have to be expensive. Skin calipers. Yep. They are awesome. I use them in my research. They're simple. Yeah. As long as the person doing them, the technician, as long as they're trained, they're great. Yeah. Now we also use ultrasound. That's what we publish with. But everybody that we test with Skinfolds and ultrasound. The other thing that's out there is a lot of the scales now will utilize BIA or bioelectrical impedance analysis, and that technology has gotten better over time. So the scale that I use, it has that. I don't like it as much as Skinfolds or ultrasound. But you could also use that to give you an idea. And
pooled data is the best anyway. So the more point of data you get, the better.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, that's it. So, again, similar scenario. How do we know when we've adapted to that adaptation? Is it, again, 2 weeks with no change and then you'd consider, or if it's obviously it's all fat and no muscle, you'd make a change pretty bloody quickly. But,
yeah.
So what's your recommendations?
Well, unfortunately, I think the adaptation on the way up, your body will adapt. You speed up your metabolism.
Yep.
But the body's very good at storing fat for most people. It's very good. So I don't think the adaptations are as evident on the way up as they are when you're trying to lose fat.
Yeah, we did a podcast. We did a podcast the other day, Bill, talking about insulin resistance and explaining that one of the early signs of insulin resistance is not the obesity, it's actually the inability to put on the muscle, because you get the resistance to the insulin like growth factor. So we'll see these people that might have been in this sarcopenic phase and wanting to build a bit of muscle. They can really struggle sometimes because the body's set up to basically store that stuff as fat and not as muscle. So we need to know really quickly if we're making these body fat muscle percentages bad, heading in the wrong direction really early and make significant changes. Yeah,
that's a great point.
Yeah, so so once we're building the muscle, at some point, do you you talked about the protein and that sort of stuff and increasing the protein. We talked a little bit off air before the podcast talking about how we've got, the different schools of thought around the collagens and the wheys and that sort of stuff. But, in the instance of gaining muscle mass and everything, how do you rate such things like creatine? Like for people supplementing creatine when they want to come into a bulking phase to put on that extra little bit of muscle mass without necessarily manipulating the calories a great deal. Do you find that those sort of supplemental strategies are as effective, or is it just straight out eat more protein and get more calories and you're going to build more mass? Do you add things like creatine?
Yeah, creatine is one of the very few supplements that I take every single day.
Yep.
Whether I'm dieting, it's every day.
Yeah, wow.
And again, I'm not a health researcher, but I'm aware of just a lot of this clinical data. Like my mentor Richard Kreider, who you're good friends with, he's done a lot of this research, and he's really opened my eyes up.
Ultimately, all of these systems need energy, and it's involved into those energy, and they also need that hydration aspect, which it also maintains hydration and energy. It's interesting to see the data coming out now for endurance. I think we're going to see a lot more good stuff around the brain and sleep and all that sort of stuff as well. All these things that require good energy and good hydration. I think it's amazing. That's a good little application. So, and my theory is that we talk about with the collagen and versus with the whey and everything, and we talked about some other papers like Mike Roberts talking about hypertrophy papers, which I really love. I learn a lot from. But if you actually have a look at that concept that we can, if we remove the skin off the body and those anatomy physiology don't do this in your clinic. Like, this is not a recommendation or even at home, but usually get an image like an anatomy physiology textbook, and you can see those bodies without the skin, and you see it's pretty much made up of red meat and white meat. So the way I look at it, the white stuff, which is all the ligaments, the tendons, the fascia, the bone, that's where we do the collagen. The collagen supports those infrastructure stuff, where our dietary protein, the red meats and the other meats we eat and the whey and everything like that are working on filling up that red meat, through that mTOR and the protein synthesis. And so combining collagens for infrastructure and dietary proteins to actually build that meat, and then looking at such things as creatine that will then hold all that extra water into that region and puff it right up, which induces all sorts of muscle hypertrophy aspects. I think the calorie bit, if you did those other strategies and you maintain good hormone levels and maintain good recovery, because I don't think you can overtrain, I think we can under-recover. So if we can maintain a lot of our recovery systems and stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and we have those really good resistance exercises and set up a strategy for muscle growth, we should be able to achieve that without exceeding that 10% calorie surplus in the average person. But for the bodybuilders that are a little bit more structured, the physique competitors that have got a full holistic system involving hormonal manipulation that will kind of counteract for the body's adaptations, they could get away with a 20 to 25% increase, you were saying, and that's how they can really bulk up. As long as we're maintaining our measuring and monitoring what is actually changing, then we should be on the right track. And if you notice, how long would you go when you notice the muscle isn't changing quickly? How long would you let them go building up a little bit of fat and not building the muscle in a growth phase? Would you pull it up pretty quickly, or?
That's a good question, and to be honest, I don't have as much experience with this type of application. The one thing I would do before I would pull the plug on it is I would keep trying to slowly increase volume of training, and then maybe like every 4 to 6 or 8 weeks, take a little bit of a detraining week.
Yep.
But I would keep increasing the volume as the calories are going up.
Yep.
And if that started to plateau, maybe just take, hey, let's take a break, reset, and then come back. So almost like an opposite of a diet break. Take a diet break. So let's stop bulking for a week or two, and then let's hit it again.
So we talked about changing the calories up and down and that sort of stuff. So I just want to flip back to fat loss again for a second. So you talked about that when someone's hit a plateau, so they're in the calorie deficit, they're trying to adapt by burning off this fat, and then they hit a bit of a plateau, and then we could typically increase their calorie expenditure for a short period of time. Before you increase the calorie, do you ever switch around the time of the day of the eating? Or have you noticed anything that if we maintain that same calorie deficit when someone's hit a plateau, but all of a sudden we say, right, skip breakfast and have your calories at night? Or if we put in phases of intermittent fasting, have you noticed that will then trigger a metabolism? Have you ever seen that in any evidence papers?
I have not. I would tend not to do that for people who have a lot of fat to lose. I think that's getting too much into the weeds. But as somebody gets leaner and leaner, and they're trying to lose, the last few pounds of body fat, I think all of those other things, timing, even the periods of when they're fasting, pre, during, and post-exercise nutrition, I think all of that stuff starts to take on more and more importance the leaner that somebody gets. Yeah. So my population of average, I would say people that are lean trying to get leaner, but not quite bodybuilders, I have not tinkered with that in my research. Okay. But that's not to suggest that I don't think it's important. I just don't think it's important until you start to get to kind of like an elite status. Yeah. And then that's when you start to notice those small percentage changes on performance and that sort of stuff. Because I remember in my naturopath clinic, I used to treat a lot of people with chronic fatigue syndromes and that, and you make these significant, like massive transformations on people's ability to produce energy to get them to normal. And they could have a significant improvement, but they become normal. It's like you get someone that's awesome or normal or great, and you do those same changes and they can get to the next level and become amazing, so it's a matter of trying to get to a stable state and a healthy foundation to work from. Is that right? What was when you say you made the change, what was something you did, like have them like not eat breakfast, or you had them eat later? Like what would you do? What was an example of something you did? Well,
typically working through, everyone's different. So what we used to do as a naturopath, we'd go through and analyze different hormonal profiles or cellular energetics. It's quite complicated in the sense that we would measure microbiome through the gut, but then we'd also have to measure the organic acids that are being excreted from the body to understand understand how they're being expressed to look for overload. So some people would have a defect on a cellular level where just straight out energy production pathways, and we could manipulate that. Some people might have a gut dysfunction that was contributing to that, and then in that instance we'd have to make a significant change. And we'd use combinations of symptom pictures, pathology testing, organic acid measurements to know if we'd actually corrected an energy production pathway. Then we could actually show significant change in these ability for them to produce energy, remove mountains. 80% of the symptom picture can be totally removed in regards to their signs and symptoms of fatigue, and they'll still just feel, okay. It would never really be taking off to leaps and bounds. You make those same slight changes, or not even to the same degree in an athlete, and it's the difference between coming fourth and first. It's he's taking these times off their events or taking that extra body composition change is a massive difference for those people. So in the everyday person, you're correcting the imbalances to get them back to normal, but health is absence of symptoms. It's not like euphoria and that sort of stuff. When you get good level of fitness and a good level of spirituality and a good level of excitement and that sort of stuff, that's when you're really getting to that level of that elite level of wellness. But otherwise, other people are just trying to get to a point of health where they don't have symptoms of disease. So, but you can still change lives and get them to that point, but they still feel, I just feel normal. I expected to feel like I'd be an abundance of energy, But then you do the same thing to an athlete, and all of a sudden they're bouncing off the walls going, this is amazing. I've never felt so amazing, So... Yeah, it's hard to give an example of any particular strategy, because as a naturopath, everyone's bloody different, and that's all we do. We work with the too hard basket and the not hard enough to find their individual strengths and weaknesses and just manipulate that. So, good combination with the coaches.
You were testing the microbiome before it was cool and popular.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm frustrating as hell, because I had these ideas to patent. I had all these ideas around dead microbes, and I was very skeptical about the live probiotic concepts. And now all these heat deactivated microbe stuff's all coming out. All my theories are being proven correct. Admittedly, when I went to patent it, I thought I'd come up with the idea because I'd read other people's research on it. And then I pieced it together. I thought, I'm a genius. I can see this pattern. But then obviously that's what they were studying. That was their intended purpose. In fact, that was probably written as their hypothesis that I skimmed past. But I still thought it was my genius idea. And 10 years later, I'm still dirty and bitter that I didn't get that patent in on time, But there's a lot of theories around the gut. And I tell you what's amazing with the gut is we're only just starting to understand just a smidgen of it. They did a decade of looking at human genomes to find out what our potential strengths and weaknesses and our different polymorphisms that have occurred. But then when they did a little bit of data on the bugs, and they realised there's 150,000 times the amount of genetic potential within our microbiome there is within our human body, and they're not even part of us. And then they're discovering that these strains of bugs, and when you're saying before that you like to simplify things and make it into a form that people can understand, that's where it's so cool with these bugs. It's so complicated, it's so in-depth, it's so ridiculously stupid rabbit hole that you can go into. But then you can also come back and simplify it and go, well, this is these strain of bugs that live inside our guts. Their favourite food is sugar. The way they actually become a dominant strain of bacteria within the microbiome, which is full of all sorts of bugs, is by starving other cells around them of sugar. And then those same chemicals that they can use to starve the microbe around them from sugar can be found in the urine. Then we're thinking these bugs that live in our guts are stopping cells from processing sugar so that they get it. That chemical's going all through our body. Therefore, they could be contributing to our inability to burn sugar because we're competing for sugar for those bugs. It's now all of a sudden it becomes, hang on, it was supposed to be all about us, and now we realise there's 10 times as many of those buggers in our guts. They're controlling our moods, they're controlling our appetite, they're controlling our energy. They're also determining a lot of our habits and cravings and everything like that. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, hang on, am I walking the dog or is the dog walking me? So it's like, who's the pet here? You know, like I start to think that maybe we only exist as vectors for transport for these little bugs so they can get around more, you know? So that's where I get caught up down these rabbit holes that I go into. But the microbiome is one thing to measure, and the genome of a microbiome is just one thing to measure. Same with like any genes, but genetic expression is most important. How are we using these genes, and how are these genes influencing our body? What is the load? What is the impact? And that's one thing to be able to say these things exist, but how do they affect us? How can we manipulate it, and why is this happening? And that's, again, when I asked earlier about, do you tell people when they increase the calories, do you let them just do what they feel like, or, you know, do you structure it? I find it fascinating to see how the different people, one man's food is medicine, another man's food is poison, you know, so that can all be determined by the microbiome. But then I freak out, Bill, because I realise the microbiome only exists that way because of what we've been eating. So it's a crazy thing. We feed the microbiome certain foods, certain strains dominate. They then tell us what foods they want to eat. It really screws with my head, because then in the instance of someone hitting a plateau and their body's craving a certain food, my brain's going, is that their intuition because they really know their body and they want to get this particular nutrient or vitamin in? Or is this a bug brainwashing them, telling them, hey, I'm craving that food, you better give it to me? Because there's some fascinating research talking about the microbiome with rebound weight gain now. So what they've found is that a certain microbiome will maybe determining your metabolism. While you're feeding it that certain, it might be also maintaining your cravings and telling you what it likes to eat and making you eat those things. But then when we change our diet, that's very similar to the food changing through seasons. You know, you can imagine before we had the convenience of the same food all year round. At some time of year, there'd be fruiting in your local area, a particular tree you might feast off. You know what I mean? And then it stops bloody fruiting, and it may not fruit again for 9 months. But so when before convenience, we might have had through winter when everything died off, or snow area, you might have eaten a lot more meat, a lot more protein. Through summer, there might have been these fruits and everything growing after spring, and you might have changed your diet there. But your microbiome is designed and has evolved to be able to survive and wait for that food to come back. So what they've discovered, so for example, just say we've got a certain strain of bacteria that's liberating a certain amount of calories from your food, and a domination of firmicutes over Bacteroidetes can actually change your calorie yield of one meal by 20%. So we go and work out but the changing in the microbiome can determine the changing in your calorie yield. So again, that can be a massive impact when we're looking at these plateaus and these phases of adaptation. Is it our hormones? Is it us adapting? Or has our microbiome decided to increase our calorie yield? Or has that bug died off because you've starved it? So what happens is, for example, if we cut out the carbs to do fat loss, the microbiome might go, fruit season's over. That happens every year. Then what it might do is just lay dormant, wait. It can lie dormant and wait for up to 9 months. And then when it thinks fruit season's back, they all come back and thrive. So this is the other problem with the cheat meals and that sort of stuff. So these people are doing everything right. They cut the carbs, and then they're told, oh, you can eat whatever you like for this period of time. If they go back and eat those foods that those bugs were hanging out for, then all of a sudden that microbiome comes back. That's where they go, oh, while I was on your diet, cutting the carbs, I was all flat and lean, but one meal like a normal person and I look pregnant. You know, they get that big bloating, the gut comes back. The next thing you know, the microbiome's thriving again and screwing back up with their metabolism. So there's some really interesting data talking about, while changing your body composition, we need to change our microbiome composition. So that way when we go back onto those other diets, it's not going to actually create rebound weight gain. So this is why I'm absolutely obsessed at the moment, is looking in through how the microbiome modifies our energy production pathways and our metabolism, and how that will respond to diet, and over what time periods can these things lay dormant, come back to life? And, you know, how does our diet and our lack of variation within our diet manipulate our microbiome? And then I look at your strategies of what you're doing, and it's brilliant when you look at its effects on the microbiome. So what you're doing is you're altering the microbiome by changing the calories, which is fantastic, and then changing the source of those macros will do it again. I just want to gather a whole heap more data now on the microbiome as well, and add that in with your body composition studies and see if we can find a wicked pattern. Yeah,
so we know what we're doing to fat. I have no idea what we're doing to the body microbiome. I have no clue.
No. Well, not many people would. I mean, the weirdest thing for a proper microbiome test, you have to do genome testing to see if what's there, but it won't tell us how much as such. So then or the expression and how effective it is. So then we've got to measure the metabolites, the organic acids that they create, and the short chain fatty acids, and then stool analysis. There's so many different ways of measuring, but you've got to combine those points of data to be able to get a good understanding of type and number and activity and how much it's influencing the body. So, man, we've got so much studies we have to do. I get a bit excited, Bill, when you talk about microbiome, if you've noticed. I get so much stuff running through my mind, and you got no idea how excited I am about the opportunities we have in regards to the microbiome. Not so much for that maintenance, that weight it can change people. I know it can significantly change so many people. So I've lost, I don't know, a lot of weight. So 30 kilos, what's that, 60, 70 pound? So through the exploration in my gut microbiome, I've dropped off all this weight. And it's by manipulating the changes of the colonies of bugs in my gut. It totally changes the way I process foods and everything like that. That's been one of the major changes, because I've done bugger all change to diet and exercise, and I still have never counted a calorie. I'm not sure how to do that, actually, to be honest. Well, my attention to detail sucks.
It's an obsessive practice for people that do what I do for my research. I mean, it works for people.
How do you do it? How do you recommend people do it? Like, do you use they pump everything into an app or something, or is it looking at big picture sort of principles, or is it really specific?
No, in my research studies, we educate them on an app. We use something called MyFitnessPal, and I get paid by just what we use.
Yeah.
But for years, I just would use my like an Excel spreadsheet, or even paper and pencil is what I did for years. And then I realized, I better get onto these computers. Apparently, they're the future.
So how do you do it, though? Do you pump in like everything? Like everything you're eating?
Yeah, like as an example, like I'm going to have 3 eggs on a bagel with some cheese. So I just, I'm 3 eggs, bagel. You can scan the barcodes. Like here's a...
Oh, wow.
Like the barcode. You can scan that and it'll just pop up. So it's very easy.
No, that's handy. Yeah.
But again, I do appreciate it's not for everybody to track these macros. If you're living your life without tracking, that's probably a better place to be.
Right. And is it have you found that people really have miscalculated their calories? Do you find when you actually get people to count them, that some people think, I probably eat around this, when they actually start pumping it in, they realize that it's significantly higher or lower than what they actually expected?
Most people, I don't, whether or not they lie or not, but even athletes, young people, everybody tends to underestimate what they eat. It's across the board. I trust bodybuilders. I don't question that.
Yeah, what is a handful of nuts? It's like, there's like half a dozen nuts or something, right? I found that was one of the big miscalculations, because I'd say to people, do you eat this? How many nuts and seeds and that sort of stuff do you eat? And I'd be, half a dozen here and there. And you actually go, no, actually, I'll get you to count them and just do what you normally do and then count them. And they're like, holy hell. Like, that is like way out of whack. Yeah. But, Bill, I want to have you as like a regular. I love everything you do and the way you explain it, because one thing I've noticed, especially with experts, is the people that really know their stuff, they can explain it simply. If you can explain it so I understand it, then you know your stuff. If I don't understand your explanations, then I keep asking questions, and usually it comes to a point where you realize that the person's just using big words because they don't actually understand what they're talking about. So what I love is that your ability to go through and break it down and make it very useful, and you know all the numbers as well, which is great because the people can take what we've talked about today and actually implement it straight away. There'll be a lot of people out there listening to what we discussed today going, shit, yeah, that's why it's not working. You know, like there'll be a lot of little light bulb moments. I can imagine people listening this today going, okay, so this is where I've gone wrong, or this is the next change. So I think we've given a lot of people some good strategies of things to make changes of immediately, but other people that may have been stuck in a plateau for longer than 2 weeks might be considering it's time to make a change. And we've given them some good options there of places to start. So thank you so much. And we will do this more often, and I desperately want you to help me get this panel together. We're going to get all these experts from the opposing fields that when they're on a panel, all of a sudden it's just sharing knowledge between absolute genius experts. There's none of this, I'm right, they're wrong. All of a sudden it's like, well, for the purpose of helping the people, let's share what we got. Thanks again for your time, Bill. I really appreciate it.
All right.
I'll talk soon.
See you later.
See you, mate. Bye.